And RLCS org has completely given up, or at least that's kind of what it seems like. Quadrant is an esports org owned by Lando Norris, and the coolest part about them is they have an RLCS team. They actually qualified for the first RLCS major of this season, and they were extremely close for qualifying for the second one. During the time right now between the two splits, they actually announced that they signed a brand new team, which in itself is not that crazy, but it also doesn't make complete sense. They signed Charlie B, Temper, and Casio. Seems like a pretty solid team. But what doesn't make sense is they had a different team. Why would they just sign a new team out of nowhere? Well, I mean, before I talk about that a little bit, let's talk about what happened with the players. You have Ixo, who is now going to be joining Oxygen. Cash ends up tweeting out a thank you to Quadrant because he's been let go, and he has more news about his future coming up soon. And Relating Wave just says he's heartbroken. And he's just completely done for the season. Quadrant is going to be holding him, and he's going to be the substitute of the roster for the remainder of the season. And this doesn't really make much sense because usually when orgs make roster changes, they only make roster changes for one of the players throughout the split so that they can keep their points. But Quadrant decided to make a move with two players, which means that the points are just now gone. The roster has basically exploded. It's just completely gone. And so as you can see with the point system here, Quadrant now currently has 5 points. And you're probably wondering, well, I don't really watch RLCS that much, so how many points did they actually have before? Well, you can see right here, they actually had 55 points, which would put them at 7th place. And that would mean that they have a really extremely highly solid chance at qualifying for Worlds. But now they only have 5 points, so their Worlds chances are near impossible. I don't even know if it's possible. They would have to qualify for the major and then probably win the major to even have a chance. I actually want to read the rest of Relating Wave's tweet here. He says he's going to be supporting the old and the new team respectively, so he's wishing the best for both of them. Very kind, very nice. But he also says in the short term, he'll likely be doing content and working closely with Quadrant. We will see what the future holds soon, with a little bit of a disappointed face, as it says. But which is such an odd thing because Relating Wave himself isn't really much of a content creator. He doesn't do all that much content-wise. He streams occasionally. I have seen him stream quite a bit, but basically, he's being held, in the bench position. So now he just kind of has to create content for the rest of the season. But something like this isn't the first time we've seen this. This also happened with Team BDS at the end of last season when they actually grabbed Seiko and they went to announce, the big Seiko announcement, all this stuff. This is for the final split of last season as well. But also with that, they ended up moving Mark by 8 to the bench. And this also, again, wasn't the only time we have seen this. Vitality also did this, where they ended up picking up Radossin. All right, pretty sure it's Radisson, but regardless, they picked up Radisson, and they had to move Fairy Peak to the bench as well. So let me run you through a hypothetical real quick. And this is not this situation, but this is something that does happen. So say I'm a player, and I sign a 2-year contract, and I play for about a year, and the team realizes that there is a better player, so they want to replace me. I have a year left on my contract, but the org, still has the contract. So eventually, they realize there's no point in constantly paying me for, that amount. So they will try to essentially sell me, which is, called a buyout. And so they'll take my contract and they'll go to other orgs. They'll say, hey, this guy will play for you. You give us some money and we will give you the player. We'll give you his contract. And that is typically just how a buyout works. But sometimes in some situations, and I'm not saying it is this situation, not at all. I have no idea what this situation is. But sometimes the orgs go through and they ask for way, way, way too much money. And so a player cannot actually even join another team because the org who has the contract is just asking for a ridiculous buyout that no org is ever going to pay for. And also sometimes this player will have, positions available or, places that they can go and they can go play, but there won't be an org there. So who is going to pay the buyout? Nobody's going to pay it because there's no org there. They just want to play for a pickup team. They have spots available for a pickup team, but if nobody's going to pay the buyout, the org's just going to keep them. And let's go back to what I said earlier as well. The org doesn't want to pay the salary. Well, there's also a different situation. And again, I don't know if it applies to any of these situations, but I know it has happened in the past where there is, a lot of times a clause for like a benched salary. So if a player gets benched, the org, essentially has the right to pay a fraction of what the player's salary is. So obviously, if you're getting your salary, you're getting 100% of your salary, every single month, yada, yada, yada. And then you get a bench salary, and that bench salary sometimes could be like, 10% or something like that. So the org can just say, hey, you're going to be benched, and we're going to basically pay you 10% and try to sell you maybe in the offseason, or they eventually maybe just let the person go. There have also been situations in the past, this is like way back when, where there was an org who had an entire team, and during the RLCS offseason, they ended up benching their whole team so they could pay them a bench salary. Genius. So with that info out there, I beg the question to you guys. Do you guys think that it's on the players to really not sign these contracts? A lot of times that these players don't have like an advantageous position to negotiate a lot of these clauses. So they kind of just have to sign what's in front of them. They kind of have to take what they can get, essentially. And, you know, sometimes some orgs know that. And again, this is not specific to this situation. I'm just saying in general. Or do you think it's maybe on the orgs to not, you know, abuse the advantageous position that they're in, and, you know, maybe not do this? And, you know, is this really the spirit of esports, is, you know, taking advantage of 16-year-old kids at times and doing this sort of stuff? You know, who knows? I actually also found this 3-comment thread on Reddit which describes 3 topics that I do want to bring up in this video as well. If you guys saw my last video, I talked about how basically esports are doomed because investor money is running low and people aren't just throwing a bunch of money at esports anymore. And one of the reasons why, or at least one of the rumors why Quadrant was getting rid of this team, or, you know, no longer paying them and stuff like that, is because they just didn't have money anymore. And so it makes sense that, you know, whatever they're paying that team, they can definitely get a cheaper RLCS team with the team they currently signed, because the team that they just signed only has like 5 RLCS points, and, you know, naturally that team is going to be a lot cheaper. The next piece of the thread was somebody saying that sounds like this might be because the players are disbanding, which, you know, could be true to an extent. Obviously, you know, if the org doesn't have any money, you know, they could just, you know, let the team go, let the team do what they want just because of that. But also, I think this is kind of like something in the RL esports scene that people think is true a lot of times, is that players hold all the power and players just able to disband a roster at will. But a lot of times the orgs do hold the power in a lot of these situations. You know, a lot of times the orgs kind of are just the nice guy, and they don't hold players at their will, like you saw with Fairy Peak on Vitality, like you see with the Relating Wave on Quadrant, like you see with Mark on BDS. A lot of times orgs just don't do that. They definitely can do that. They have the ability to do that, but there's some saying that I can't really remember off the top of my head, but something about cows and sour milk, like a sad cow makes sour milk. I don't know. It's some sort of quote like that. But if you have, you know, an asset, I hate saying players are assets, but, you know, I was a player, I understand the whole thing. If you have an asset and it's unhappy, and this person's unhappy, they're only going to give you bad results or like bad work and stuff like that. So, you know, you want to make them happy. You want to have a team that is with you to be happy. So, you know, you only get a good result at the end of the day. Whether that's, you know, gameplay, or whether that's, you know, sponsor stuff, whether that's stream hours, whether it's anything. And then you have the final part of this comment thread where this guy says, and I think this is part of why the orgs want out now. Why bother signing these kids to contracts when they have no care about them and change teammates every 6 months? Which, you know, if you just go back to what I just said, the orgs a lot of times do have power, but they do want to kind of be the good guy. They don't essentially want to hold these players hostage in a lot of these situations. They don't want to do that to them. So it does put them in an awkward spot. But again, they do have the power to do that. So is it really something that the players are controlling, or is it something that the orgs are controlling? It's kind of 50-50. It's just whichever org you're getting, essentially, whichever org really feels like they have to make a decision and they have to hold a player or whatever they have to do. But like this guy says, then the org is left holding the bag and hoping for a transfer buyout, which, you know, is exactly what just happened with Relating Wave. You would assume that Cash got a buyout. He didn't announce anything yet, but he said something is coming soon. But if EXO is going to Oxygen, you would definitely assume that some sort of buyout happened there for EXO's contract to be able to go to Oxygen. And then, you know, the insane amount of player movement is bad for the esport. Need to go back to a 1-season window at most, which I think is actually a valid point. I think that transfer windows should only happen after the winter split. There should be, you know, the season is like 9 months long or something like that. And I think the season should just have one transfer window. You know, you play with a team for 2 months. What is it? I mean, it's for a lot of the bubble players, it's 2 events, right? But, you know, you play at 3 events and a major if you actually qualify for the major, and then usually a team splits. A lot of times a team splits, not every time, but a lot of times that does happen. And so if you have that happening 1, 2, 3 times a season, I don't know. I guess you have to count the off season. So off season, after split 1, after split 2, that's 3 times. You're going to have constant roster moves. It also makes it extremely hard for a fan to actually enjoy watching an org as well. A lot of times fans in general just follow players, which is something that I do as well. You know, I'm more of a fan of players than I am a fan of orgs. And at the end of the day, I think this whole thing, I mean, there's a lot to it. There really is. I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on basically everything I just said. I know there was a lot there, but, you know, I would appreciate hearing from you guys as well. That's all. Enjoy. Hope you enjoyed. I don't know, bro.